I spent my childhood in a small town nestled in the hills of West Virginia. I'm not going to name the college I went to, but it was a small university in a little town only about 15 minutes from my hometown. I started as a freshman in 2021, and COVID was still a big deal when it came to the college experience. One of the biggest areas it impacted was the dorms. Because of COVID, most students chose not to live on campus, so they rented apartments close by. I didn't have that luxury. I was broke. So I stayed in the dorm and drove home every weekend since I lived so close. Still, I wanted to experience what dorm life was supposed to be like. On my first day, I met my roommate. We had texted a little bit before because the school had given her my number so we could get to know each other, which I thought was a little weird. She texted me first, and she seemed nice enough. Meeting her in person, she was still nice, but didn't say much. She definitely had a privileged attitude. I remember one time we were talking. She said, "Everyone has their own rooms because there aren't enough students. I had one last semester and now, up until you got here." I was a little taken aback and didn't really know what to say, so I just changed the subject and kept the conversation going. I told her I lived nearby and that I'd be going home every Friday for the weekend and would be back Monday morning at 600 a.m. She didn't have much to say during the week. She spent most of her time with her boyfriend in his dorm room. Now, for the creepy part. The first Friday, I packed up my bag for the weekend and left. I got back Monday morning at 600 a.m., just like I said I would. I didn't have class until 1000, so I decided to go back to sleep. I had a really thick memory foam mattress, and after laying down for about 10 minutes, I felt the edge of the bed sink in. I didn't move. I waited a minute, barely processing what was happening because I was so tired. Then the mattress popped back up. That's when it hit me. Someone had been leaning on my bed. I turned around and saw her facing the wall, so I figured she was probably sleeping. So I just went back to sleep. The next weekend, I left again and came back at the same time. Again, I wanted to catch a few more Z's. Just moments after laying down, I felt the mattress sink in again. But this time, it wasn't just the edge. The whole side sagged and someone was sitting right next to me. I didn't move at all. I just lay there, frozen. And then I heard them get up. My bed was really high. In fact, I needed a step stool just to climb up onto it, and I heard them jump off. I held my breath, then looked over. She was lying on her bed again, facing the wall. I didn't know what to think. Was I hallucinating from being so sleep-deprived? Was it sleep paralysis? It couldn't be. I could still move. Could someone have gotten into my room? Impossible. We were the only ones with keys. I decided I must just be super tired and imagining things. So I went back to sleep. When Monday rolled around, I was seriously nervous. I walked in and saw her lying down facing my bed. She was asleep, so I climbed into bed and tried to get some sleep as well. Maybe 5 minutes later, I felt my bed sink in again. I squeezed my eyes shut, felt someone sit down next to me, and I braced myself to turn around. Then I felt a hand on the back of my neck. My heart dropped. I thought I was going to pass out. I didn't move a muscle. They didn't squeeze. They just held my neck. After what felt like hours, I finally felt them get off my bed. I still didn't move. I stayed frozen for a few more moments, completely terrified. Then I turned around. She was facing the wall, sleeping, but I didn't care. I immediately left the room and called my mom. I skipped class. I told my mom everything that had happened, and she reported it to the school. Thank God they let me switch rooms. They asked if I wanted to get the police involved, but I said no. There wasn't any real proof she had done anything. I just asked them not to give her another roommate. After unpacking in my new room, I remembered a couple of things. She had told me once that she had a roommate before me who didn't stay very long, but she never said why. I also remembered this one day she opened a locked drawer that was full of about 10 bottles of prescription medicine. She said it was for a skin issue. I wondered if that was even true. Maybe she had some other disorder or the medication had some scary side effects. A few days later, I realized I had left a book and a binder in her room. I didn't really care that much about the book, but she messaged me and asked me to come get it. I told her I needed to focus on school in my new room, but I agreed to get my stuff so she wouldn't suspect anything. My key still worked, so I went in. She wasn't there, and I sighed in relief. I grabbed my stuff and turned to leave. And as I turned, she was standing right there in the doorway. I hadn't even heard her unlock it. I smiled, trying to stay calm. She didn't say anything at first. I walked past her to leave. Then she asked, "Where's your new room?" I told her it was on the first floor. She asked which hall, so I lied to her. She asked what it was close to, like the stairs, the front entrance, the office, stuff like that. I told her I didn't remember, but she kept pushing. I lied again and told her it was near the stairs. I turned around and left, and I never saw her again. I thought about telling her boyfriend, but I was too scared. I still think about it sometimes. Was I dreaming? Was I hallucinating? I don't think so, but it couldn't have been anyone else. Only we had keys. Maybe she was sleepwalking as a side effect from her medication, or maybe she was planning something really sinister. My mom thinks she was testing how close she could get to me before I woke up, and that one morning she might have actually tried to choke me. I really don't know. It's all in the past now. And I really hope she never had another roommate again. This incident happened while I was at university. I went to the University of Huddersfield from 2021 to 2023. It's not really known for its nightlife, so a lot of students end up spending late nights on campus, especially in the library or the academic buildings that stay open 24/7. I've never been the type of person to stay out late, but this all happened during my last year when I didn't really have a choice. I was taking an advanced statistics class, and our professor was famous for giving us a ton of assignments. The due date for one of the biggest projects was getting closer and closer, and I hadn't made as much progress as I should have. My laptop had been acting up, so I decided to use the computers in the business building. The business building is kind of isolated from the rest of the campus. It's a 3-story building, kind of old, and it always had this weird sterile silence to it, especially late at night. But the computer lab on the second floor was usually pretty empty after 9:00 p.m., so I figured it would be the best place for me to focus. I got there around 1,000 that night. The campus was already dead quiet, and when I stepped inside, I immediately noticed how much colder it felt than it was outside. I swiped my student ID, heard the beep, and the door unlocked. The whole place had a strong smell of cleaning chemicals, which meant I probably wouldn't run into any of the cleaning staff since they had already made their rounds in this building. I went straight to the computer lab, turned on one of the computers, and got to work. For a while, it wasn't too bad. The hum of the computer and the tapping of my keyboard filled the silence. I kept glancing at the clock in the corner of the screen, reminding myself to leave before 100 a.m. But around 11:30, something really weird happened. I was scrolling through some data when I heard the sound of a door slamming shut somewhere down the hallway, not the front entrance. It came from further inside the building. At first, I just brushed it off. Maybe it was just the air system or the janitor. But then I remembered that the janitors had already been through, so they would have been gone by now. I tried to ignore it and kept working. But then I heard footsteps. Slow, heavy footsteps echoing from the hallway right outside the lab. They weren't rushed, and they weren't faint. Whoever it was, they were walking like they wanted to be heard. I froze in my chair, staring at the computer screen, hoping they would just pass by. But instead, the steps stopped right outside the lab door. I could see through the little window in the door if I leaned back, but I couldn't bring myself to look. I just sat there holding my breath. After maybe 10 seconds, I heard the door handle being rattled. It wasn't like someone casually testing it. It was someone deliberately trying to scare me, like whoever it was wanted to open it, but couldn't. My heart started pounding. The lab doors locked automatically after a certain time, so I knew they shouldn't be able to just walk right in. But the way they kept rattling the handle made me feel sick. After maybe 30 seconds of this, the sound just stopped. The footsteps started again, slowly moving down the hall until they finally faded away. I just sat there in silence, trying to decide if I should just pack up and leave. But my project was due the next morning, and a part of me thought that maybe it was just another student messing around. I tried to convince myself of that and went back to typing. But not even 10 minutes later, I heard it again. Footsteps. Only this time, they weren't coming from the hallway. They were above me. The ceiling in that building had those thin panels, and you could sometimes hear the pipes when the heat came on. But this wasn't pipes. This was the distinct sound of someone crawling or dragging themselves directly above the tiles. I stared up, terrified of what I might see. I could see one of the tiles shift slightly, just enough to know that there was weight pressing down on it. Then came this slow, creaking sound, like someone carefully lowering themselves, trying not to be heard. I had had enough at that point. I yanked out my flash drive, shoved my notebook into my backpack, and sprinted towards the door. The second I stepped into the hallway, it was like I had walked into a different world. The hall was dimly lit by those buzzing fluorescent lights, and all I could hear was the sound of my sneakers squeaking against the tiles. I walked fast, trying not to outright run. I got to the stairwell, shoved the door open, and started down. That's when I made the mistake of looking up. On the landing above me, just one floor up, there was a man. He wasn't a student, and he definitely wasn't a professor. He just looked out of place, like his clothes were way too baggy and torn. His face was half-shadowed, but I could see that his mouth was hanging open like he was grinning really wide. He didn't move. He just stood there staring down at me. I bolted. I flew down the stairs so fast I almost tripped. I slammed through the first-floor door, and I sprinted for the front entrance. My ID card barely registered fast enough to unlock it, but once it clicked, I shoved it open and ran across campus without even looking back. I didn't stop until I was inside my dorm with my door locked behind me and my back pressed against the door as I tried to catch my breath. The next morning, I went back only because I had to turn in my projects. When I walked into the business building during the daytime, it felt like a completely different place, but I noticed something that made my stomach drop. I saw that one of the ceiling tiles was missing. It was the one directly above where I had been working, along with the one from the corner, which was the tile I saw moving. It was as though someone had been watching me work, then proceeded to rattle the door handle to deliberately mess with me, and when they found the door was locked, they climbed back up into the ceiling and entered from there. I didn't even want to think about what his intention was if he had made it into the lab before I ran. I think it is safe to say that I'm going to buy a new laptop and do all my assignments from the comfort of my own dorm from now on. My name is Annabelle. I'm 20 years old, and I'm from the UK. And this happened to me in high school, which is what we call college here in the UK. This all went down when I was 16. I'm about to tell you about the scariest day of my entire life. I know that sounds dramatic, but you'll understand why. So, for context, my school had these lanyards with ID cards attached to them. And even though anyone can just walk into the building, you could only go past the foyer if you scanned one of these IDs on a screen, which would unlock the door and let you into the school. The IDs had your face and name on them, but a lot of kids would flip them around so you couldn't see their picture. You also needed this to open up pretty much every door in the school other than the doors to the classrooms. Also, this was a fairly newly built school. It was really small, but it looked bigger because the building itself was pretty large. 1/3 of the building was a special school for kids with learning disabilities. Another third was a nursery, and the last third was the actual high school. I had just started at this high school, and I remember very clearly that everyone was told on the first day to make absolutely sure not to let anyone into the school that we didn't know. The day that this incident happened, it was the second week of school, but this was actually only my second full day there because I had been feeling sick all week. I had geography class all day, and it was about halfway through the day when this all took place, maybe 20 minutes after lunch period. I remember drinking a ton of juice that I had gotten from the cafeteria at lunch because I had to finish it all before lunch period ended since we weren't allowed to have drinks out in class, and I had nowhere to put it without it spilling all over. So, 20 minutes later, yeah, I really needed to use the bathroom. I asked my teacher if I could go real quick. We weren't usually allowed to go to the bathroom during class anyway, so he was pretty annoyed about it since we had just had break. But he could see I really needed to go, so he reluctantly agreed. This is actually pretty significant because at that time, nobody would really be walking around the school. I didn't even really see teachers walking around very often during class hours. I left the class and let myself through a set of double doors into the cafeteria. And keep in mind, there was nobody in there at this point. I carried on walking into another large room with a second set of classrooms, used the bathroom, and let myself back into the cafeteria again to head back to my classroom. When I let myself back through the doors to the cafeteria, though, there was a man sitting at one of the tables. It wasn't weird for someone to be in there. Like I said, people weren't usually walking around during class hours, but they still did. I mean, I was 2 at that time. I didn't know who it was that was sitting there. He was too old to be a student, so I just assumed it was either a teacher or a parent, and I just kept walking. But then he said, "Hey," and I just let out a squeal because I'm a pretty nervous, jumpy person anyway, and I really wasn't expecting him to say anything to me. I was pretty embarrassed, but he laughed and said, "Sorry, didn't mean to scare you." That's when I noticed that he actually had a lanyard on. So, at that point, I was pretty sure he was a teacher. What I realized later when I look back on this is that even though he had his lanyard on with the ID part was flipped over so that the side with your face and name on it was facing the back side of the card holder that's attached to the lanyard. Like I said earlier, kids would do that all the time at the school. The scanner would still work, so it really wasn't a big deal, but it was definitely weird for a teacher to do that. I didn't really pay attention to that detail at the time, though. I need some help getting some work stuff out of my car. "Do you mind coming out with me for just a sec?" he asked me. I didn't even hesitate to reply with, "Yeah, of course." Because, again, I just figured he was a teacher. We walked out of the cafeteria in silence and into the foyer, and then out of the building. And I kind of noticed that he seemed a bit nervous, like teachers usually make small talk with you when you're walking somewhere with them. And he wasn't saying anything. And also, he was moving his hands a lot. Like at one point he had his hands in his pockets, and then he'd take them out and kind of hold his hands together. I'm really shy and not too good in social situations, so I didn't make any attempts at small talk either. With the layout of the front of the school after we left the building, you've got about 50 or so meters, which is around 55 yards to the car park, which you can't even see until you're right next to it, because there's a bunch of bushes blocking it. If you walk straight on without turning into the car park, you'll be off the school property. So, we were walking to the car park in silence, and then he suddenly says, "Yeah, my work stuff is in the boot." That's what we call the trunk of a car in the UK. He said, "I just have a few bags, so I just need you to help me carry a couple into the school." I said, "Yeah, that's fine." We got to the car park and he said, "My car is the blue one down at the end." And as we got a few meters away from it, I could kind of see something in the back seat. And as we were getting closer to it, I realized there were at least 2 men hiding in the back seat. I just froze, and instead of running away, I just blanked. I guess they saw that I could see them because the back door swung open. And all of a sudden, there was a man scrambling out of the car, and the man who I thought was a teacher grabbed my arm as I turned to run back to the school. This guy was pretty tall and large, by the way. And for context, I'm 5'2" and pretty underweight, so I don't even know how I managed it. I guess it was a rush of adrenaline or whatever, but I used every bit of strength in my body to yank my arm out of his grip and start running back towards the school. I could hear multiple heavy footsteps running after me, but thank God they stopped pretty soon after I started running away, because my school had big glass automatic doors, and you just have to wait for them to open. And they definitely would have caught up to me if they had kept going. I guess the fact that they were glass doors, though, would have been pretty risky if there had been someone walking by. Either way, I got into the foyer and ran straight into the open cafe, which was connected to the library, and I ran up to the person working at the cafe to tell her everything that was going on. She calmed me down and came with me into the school to a teacher's office and called my parents and the police. There's security cameras in the parking lot, so they were caught and charged with attempted kidnapping. Also, it turned out that man was able to get into the building because some kid had dropped their lanyard outside the school, and that's what he was using and why he flipped the ID over. I didn't go back to school for a couple of weeks, and I'm still in therapy for this experience. But I thought that writing this all down and sharing my story might help me process everything. This is still the scariest experience of my entire life.